And welcome to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. We're here every week talking to interesting people about interesting topics. And this week we have a guy who knows a lot about both politics and business, and we're going to get him to delve into both.
Well, both locally, nationally, and internationally. Marc Nuttle has been with us before. He's going to be with us today talking not only about the book that he's just written, but about what's going on in his world, because it's interesting.
Marc Nuttle, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
In driving rain, blistering heat, and bitter cold, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, Chesapeake drills non-stop for natural gas on American soil. Chesapeake drills more new gas wells than anyone else, and from those wells collects the most drilling information and acquires more 3D seismic images, leveraging every efficiency to improve the odds of finding more natural gas every day with every well we drill. The better job we do of discovering bigger reserves of clean-burning American natural gas, the greater the prosperity of our nearby communities, our state, and our nation. And as long as there are more gas reserves to be found here in the U.S., we will never rest. Chesapeake. Natural gas wins the day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
We're pleased to have back a visitor that's been on a time or two with us before, Marc Nuttle, who is a partner, managing partner of Oklahoma Sovereign Developers. He's an attorney living in Norman, but he's had a very interesting practice and the life so far. He has represented elected officials and business leaders locally, nationally, and internationally. He has represented countries. He has advised such countries as Bulgaria, Russia, and the People's Republic of China on certain issues about doing business in the United States. He's appeared on a number of television shows, both nationally, all the major networks, CNN, Flashpoint, I don't mind mentioning, and of course on our show a time or two. But we're sure glad to have him back. Marc, welcome back.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the show. What have you been doing recently?
Well, Mick, I'm still working on some international projects. I still do some work in China and in the Eastern Bloc countries. I also represent some members of Congress on policy matters, and advise them particularly on finance and economic international concerns.
A fascinating sentence here on the back page of the book, which we're going to show in a few minutes. It says you worked on the campaigns of both Ronald Reagan and Boris Yeltsin, and you worked on the presidential candidates campaigns of Pat Robertson and Steve Forbes. A lot of diversity there. How do you pick your candidates?
Or do they pick you?
I was going to say, those opportunities came to me, and I was fortunate to have them. I didn't pick them. They called, and we interviewed, and one thing led to another, and I worked in those campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Well, some anecdotes from all those moments, especially those national campaigns, both I guess was that the USSR or was that Russia when you were working on Yeltsin's campaign?
No, it was still the Soviet Union, and he was running for president of Russia.
So how do you run a campaign in the Soviet Republic?
Well, it was very difficult. I can remember sitting in his office with him there. when the Soviet government decided they would just extend the elections 30 days because they weren't winning. And they literally did not, and they made it public, didn't try to hide it. They didn't understand, well, we're not winning, so we extend the elections 30 days. No, 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 you can't do that. At least we had some UN observers that kind of got that stopped, but we got that stopped, held the elections, and he won.
And what appealed to you of Steve Forbes as a candidate?
Economic policy. Actually, he thinks outside the box to the extent that, and we still, that's why I wrote the book partly, we have, we're moving into a transitional time in our lives, into a world economy where the United States must understand its position and what it represents and not yield to other forces that wish that we were less competitive. Steve Forbes understands that.
Yeah.
And it was a fascinating time to be with him and talk economic policy.
I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I want to talk to you about your television work because suddenly you're popping up on all the cable news channels. How is that going, and do you enjoy that experience? Because I'm sure they're putting you on the spot a lot of times, and there's a lot of eyeballs looking at Marc Nuttle, and you're taking some pretty tough questions.
Well, I do enjoy it. I did both conventions for Fox, and I actually enjoyed the Democratic convention because I could ask tough questions. Bob Beckel is one of their chief analysts, and he ran the Mondale campaign the year that I was National Field Counsel to Ronald Reagan. So we're kind of old war horses together. One of the things they asked me to do, I can give them a 30-year look now, the trends, what does this mean? Have we come full circle? What does it mean to the states, the parties, the coalition groups? And those are a lot of the questions I get and the analysis they want from me. But I enjoy the tough questions, and I enjoy meeting these young broadcasters now who have a different viewpoint. And the last thing is I enjoy getting the research and analysis. The cable shows are pretty good at their polling and the data they get to analyze, which we didn't have 30, 40 years ago.
Mark, you've recently completed a book called Moment of Truth, and I think we can show the front, there it is, Moment of Truth. I've glanced through it. I frankly haven't read it cover to cover, but I did notice that there are a lot of things in there that are interesting to me, and I'm going to go back and police it up. Why did you choose to write this book, and why at this time?
Well, for two reasons. I predicted in this book a year ago that we would be in recession in the United States around the election of 2008, but further that we would be in a global recession. Now, no one could have seen this meltdown coming. In fact, I knew there would be some tough decisions to make, but my history had been that the government would put this off until next year, this meltdown, if it came. But understanding the decisions and the choices we make in a world recession are critical to future generations and our children and our grandchildren. It's not the same world that it was in 1929 for a lot of reasons. And the global decisions is what I wanted people to understand that they're making in government policy. So I wrote it. And it's important to Oklahoma for a couple of reasons we'll get to in a minute, I think. But, and more so, I think, than any other state.
Okay. You mentioned in your book that America is a center-right country. The national media is not. Explain what you were referring to there.
Well, for about 25 years, Mick, we've done research trying to understand where are the American public as individuals on a myriad of issues, both international economics, social policy, taxes, education, and states' rights, and so on and so forth. On a 1 to 10, and we always pick somebody that's a current elected official. So we're using Nancy Pelosi as a 1 and Ron Paul as a 10, two elected officials on the left and right. The public is about a 7.5. It's that far right of center. Republican Party is a little bit further right of that, about an 8. The press is about a 4. Democratic Party is about a 3. And the problem in the past has always been that a man or woman running for the Democratic nomination had to run as a liberal and then make this quantum leap back to the right to get to the center of the universe. The myth, though, that the press still tries to portray is that there's a middle, that there's a 5. There is no 5 in this country. There's a center right and a left, and that's it. And that's been confirmed in this cycle also.
What accounts for the press being on the left side of the number scale?
Well,
why is that?
There's a couple of reasons. I mean, we can only philosophically try to understand that. A lot of schools of higher education on the East and West Coast, where from journalists come, are liberal schools of intellectual elitism, quite frankly. And they're, I think, indoctrinated at an early age. It just kind of seems to be New York, LA leans that way. That's one thing. Another, I have to be careful, definitely how I say this, but when you become an elitist, let me just say it, when you become an elitist, you believe that you can answer all things yourself. And if you give that back to the individual, you're actually saying, well, maybe I don't have all the answers. And that's just an abomination to a lot of people in the media. No, I know best. I'm not even going to consider that you might know something I don't know. And therefore, central government, managed government, more government is a projection of themselves into, I've got the answers and I go implement it. You can't do it yourself. And that's the tug, I think.
You mentioned in your book that that in times of stress, 30% of the population, which may lean right, ends up nevertheless voting for government programs that they might not vote for in less stressful times. Why is that?
Well, the two axioms that I chart in the book, one is the center right, and the second is what I call the 30-30-30 theory. 30% of the public gets up every day and says, how do I get through life without more government? They're wired that way. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a lot of the way that people in Europe think. And they always vote for government programs, usually the Democratic Party, or they don't vote. 30% get up every day and say, how do I get through today and keep the government out of my business? Just let me pursue my own talents the way I see fit. They vote conservative, usually Republican, or they don't vote. But 30% on a swing scale, not a 5 on a 1 to 10, but get up and say, how do I feel economically about my security for a job and my ability to pay my bills tomorrow? That economic security factor to that 30% trumps everything. Moral values, philosophy, everything. Political philosophy, parties, everything. It is how Bill Clinton beat the sitting president of the United States in 1992. And when this economic crisis hit this country in September, the day that the stock market started to collapse, and you knew how bad it was, and the impressions from the media explained that to you, John McCain started falling the polls. He's not the party of programs. And I would submit to you that this has been a very complicated cycle. It's a transitional cycle. We can talk about it if you want to, not take anything away from from Presidential-elect Obama. But the initial movement to his campaign was a vote for the Democratic Party, a party of programs.
We're going to take a break. Marc Nuttle is our guest. We're discussing a wide variety of topics, and I hope you'll stay with us right here on The Verdict.
This cane is called For All the Grandfathers, and I dedicate it to my grandfather, Franklin Allen. Me and him just had like a spiritual thing where I just learned lessons from him without him telling me anything. The 3 dots on the feather represent my immediate family, and as my grandfather told me about the Chickasaws, that family is the most important thing. To me, the eagle sees everything, as our elders do, also representing my grandfather and his bravery in the Korean War. I actually just started on the wings for the eagles, and that's when my mother called and told me that he passed away. He took his journey. It's like somebody watching you when nobody's there. I guess he wanted me to finish it, so I finished it. He's been with me ever since. It shows how strong a Chickasaw family can be.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh, yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers and our guest, Marc Nuttle. Marc, I want to discuss the cultural uniqueness of the small and maybe the family business, but the small business as it applies to Oklahoma and the rest of the country. What's your take there?
Okay, well, let's talk about it a minute. 55% of the private sector works for a business of 25 employees or less. That's a big number. Now, 20% works for the government, so it's about 45% of the public. That's unique to the United States of America. Nowhere else in the world does that exist. You have small business in other places, but in a managed economy, a European system, a central government, small business can't exist because it can't carry the mandates of funding for health care, pension funds, 60 days notice before you lay somebody off, things like that that are big government, big business, big labor programs. In Oklahoma, make it 65%. We're a small business state. And when you look at who pays the tax, they also pay about that much tax. Number one revenue for the state is income tax. Second is gross production tax. Third is franchise tax. And in that income tax, those people are working for small businesses. And so as we make these choices, that's what's unique to the United States. We talk about why, but it's almost as simple as this.
Well, is an economy better to have large businesses, or is it better to have small businesses?
It's better to have a combination. You need large business for the concentration of capital. It takes AT&T to rewire a country's phone system, but it takes the small business supplier and software writers and engineers and small companies helping AT&T become efficient and to be the best world corporation to do that for a foreign country. Small business is the most flexible, the most creative, the closest to the population, and the most nimble. It's the best of both worlds. You need both. That's why this country has done.
Is that reliant on small business part of the reason that Oklahoma has fewer people with health care than other states?
Well, possibly, possibly. It is several states have tried to solve this problem by mandating health care benefits, and not either, and it's some sort of combination of paying for part of it and the business pays for part of it. It doesn't work as well for small business, so it's a give and take. But let's think about the other benefit. The average unemployment rate in Europe over the last 2 decades has been 10 to 12%. The average unemployment rate in the United States has been 4 to 6, exactly half. Why? We're both industrialized nations, we're both mature, we're both in a world economy. Why? Because small business picks up that slack and employs those people, particularly at the entry level. And I would submit that it's better to have those people paid than have them on welfare and on a government health care system.
What's the work ethic of an American versus someone in Europe or the Soviet Union or Russia where you've done some work, and in China? What do you see as the difference of the work ethic of a person, average person in those countries?
Well, the more free enterprise the country, the better the work ethic. That you're there to do a job to serve somebody, and that the market dictates the value of your product, the added value of what you do, versus the state dictating it from above in a central government. The more entrepreneurial, the more free enterprise, the better the work ethic. In a socialistic country, which you have in Europe, some socialist that are democracies where I've worked, you find people saying it doesn't matter, the state will take care of me. In a communist country where I've worked, I mean, there's hopelessness, because it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how good you work or how hard you work. There's no benefit to your value-added productivity. So I'd answer it that way.
Well, in your book you compare you make another comparison of the definition of freedom. Americans' definition of freedom versus a European's definition of freedom. Can you tell our viewers about that and why that's of interest?
Sure. First, the United States is one of only a few countries, less than 5. Think about this now. That's something we take for granted. That you can go into business if you want to without the government's permission, as long as it's within the guidelines of the law. You want to start a new business, an entrepreneurial effort, or side business, you can. You don't have to ask a government bureaucrat for permission. In most countries, even in Europe, you do. First, you have to convince them it's the value of the state's resources, because you're into this big government system. They want you to employ people. Then you got to sign. You got to be bonded that you can pay for their severance if you lay them off, and that you can pay for their unemployment and things like that. Not in the United States. So that's one definition of freedom. Most people go into work for small business, believe it or not to make money, but to be able to spend more time with their family as they see fit, control of their time for their family values. Now, what's the difference in Europe? Europe is still the remnant of the feudal system of the Middle Ages. You work for the state so the state can take care of you. That was the feudal system. And whatever the state decided was best for you, you accepted it. And there's still that mentality there today. So they would define freedom as eating every day, but don't worry about quality of life, time with your family, or anything else. Just take care of me.
We've gone through a presidential election where tax policy was center stage with Barack Obama's policy, which basically implied that at 200,000 or maybe 250,000, taxes would increase, but for the so-called 95% of Americans, taxes would decrease. We also know about the Bush tax cuts that have taken place throughout this last decade. What's Marc Nuttle's thought process on those two policies and anything in the middle that you might like to suggest?
Well, first, to give a tax break to 95% of the public, you got to send them a tax check. I mean, to get to that many people, there aren't that many people paying tax to get a tax break. That was never really explored, and that's a cost of government. Why do that? I mean, you're not paying tax now, so why send them money? But second, here's the most important point, Mick. It is becoming cliche to say that we should have windfall profit taxes, particularly on the oil industry, because good grief, they're making $33 billion a quarter at ExxonMobil, and that's just obscene. Well, how do you find that? I mean, over 10 years, they haven't made that kind of money, and the cost of doing exploration is, again, the point of big business versus small. You need ExxonMobil to do that kind of exploration, to find that energy, to find alternative energy, and so on and so forth. Windfall's profit tax is confiscation. At the point that you make so much money, okay, now it belongs to the state. When you really think that through, that means that really it all belongs to the state anyway. And you're a middle manager. You can manage the resources as we see fit. You get to a certain point, we take it back because it's really ours. Now, to the point, though, of 200,000, 250,000, to increase the tax on anybody making over $250,000 is a step towards windfall profit. It means that no matter how hard you work, no matter how well this show does, you make a certain amount of money. Well, it belongs to the state because that's only fair.
Well, isn't our progressive tax system a step in that direction?
Yes.
And we've had that for many years.
But it's set to a point where you know in advance what it is. Yes, it is, Kent. And I think that, though, to accelerate it to the point where, particularly if it was 100% at a certain level, is beyond progressive. It's confiscation.
Yeah.
Is there a connection between the Bush tax cuts and the economic crisis we're facing right now?
Is there a connection to the Bush tax cuts?
Did it help lead to the economic collapse, or did it help support it as long as it did? In other words, were the Bush tax cuts better for the United States and the rest of the world's economy, or were they not better?
Well, first, one of the answers to your question is the flat tax is the proven best system.
Yeah.
It's the Hong Kong system. Every country that has emerged, from Chile to Ireland, that has tried it has flourished. And the reason that big countries like France don't want it is because it makes them uncompetitive. And they're bloated in what they provide for the system and what they have to tax. And we'll talk about that in a minute as far as Europe. But the flat tax is the best. And then taxes. I mean, then subsidize things if you want to, rather than the progressive tax system. But as far as the Bush tax cuts, no. A tax cut generally, Mick, is always good. I mean, that is also a proven economic model. Milton Friedman proved that in his arithmetic formulas, that what the productivity you'll get from an entrepreneur and the use of capital reinvested in the system. In other words, it's whether the individual can use the money better than the government. That's all a tax is, the government taking it and reapplying it. They don't put it in their pocket versus an individual. No, this economic meltdown, let me see if I can do this in 1 minute. This is kind of like a butterfly the metaphor of a butterfly flapping its wings in Indonesia, and there's a hurricane in Houston. This started in the 90s with an executive order, an edict from then President Bill Clinton, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac was making too much money. Now, these were private corporations. At one time were government corporations, but they did never let go of them. And so they, in fact, and the executive order was start investing in subprime loans only called poor borrowers who didn't qualify. Now, to make a long story short, in Oklahoma, I can remember bankers coming to me and saying, "Can't you do something about this federal policy?" And I'd say, "Well, let's talk about it." And the auditors would come in and question why they didn't have more diversity in their loan portfolio, not on ethnicity or gender, just on income levels. And it was because there weren't the applications. And they never got that resolved, quite frankly. The bankers would just say, "Look, what do you want me to do? Go door to door?"
We've got about 30 seconds left, but I want you to finish this point.
Okay, well then real quick. But on the East and West Coast, they did have applications, and they couldn't get around it. And so what happened is that the investment banks found a way to help them make those loans to subprime borrowers that could, in fact, make it through the audit. Here's what they did. They took a $2 million set of loans and put it with an $8 million bad set of loans, and took a $10 million package upstream and then floated that as into hedge funds, basically. And then real quickly, I'm sorry, no one knew what it was worth. Then AIG insured those on debt swaps to a certain extent, and just kept pushing those upstream until they rolled over back on us. First AIG, then the investment banks, now the banks. That's really what happened.
Marc Nuttle, our guest. We're obviously going to have Marc back on as this evolving economic crisis continues to filter down.
Yeah, please come back. We're not through.
A final word after this.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
We're back on The Verdict, wrapping up a show with Marc Nuttle.
Always glad to have Marc on. We'll have him back soon.
Look forward to it. And you can go to our website and suggest a show that you'd like to see right here on The Verdict. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.